Good afternoon and welcome to our forum entitled Fatherhood, Black Men and Boys, Police Brutality. The killing of our people must stop. My name is Robert Fairchild, advisor for the Fatherhood and Mentoring Initiative for the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I will be your moderator, and I would like to thank everyone for tuning in and being a part of this session. We trust that you will be enlightened by the information from this discussion. Black fathers, men, and boys are facing a crisis that must be brought to an end. Many of the victims are fathers whose loss has been devastating, had a devastating effect on our families. The thought that every Black man is at a potential risk of losing his life when stopped by a policeman for whatever reason is totally unacceptable. The de-escalation procedures that officers are to use when faced with a difficult situation goes out the window and results in the wrongful use of a gun or some life-ending act. The ability to capture these incidents on camera has brought to light a terrible practice that has gone on far too long. It's time that police are held accountable for their actions. We have to move beyond the usual no resolution activity and routine that we go through when one of these incidents occur. Our discussion today will be centered around looking at the elements that cause this problem, understanding how we can identify and target bad actors, and determining what legislative police reform acts, which include holding officers accountable for their actions, need to be taken to eliminate this serious attack on the Black community. I would like to begin now by introducing our panelists. Our panelists consist of legislators. We have legislators representing the state level and also the federal level. The panelists will primarily be from the state level. Beginning, our first introduction would be to Delegate Nick Charles. Nick Charles is a Maryland state delegate representing over 1,119 constituents in Maryland's 25th district, encompassing the major landmarks such as Andrews Air Force Base and Prince George County College. He is also a part of several committees, one in particular in the Prince George's County delegation. He serves as the vice chairman of the law enforcement subcommittee, which shapes the policy around issues relating to alcohol beverages and the liquor board, police, courts, gaming, criminal procedures, and public safety. Our second panelist is Delegate Luke TORIAN. Luke TORIAN is the chair of the House Appropriation Committee for the Virginia House of Delegates. He has been a member since 2010. He represents the 52nd District, which is part of Prince William County, Virginia. Our third panelist is Cliff Hayes Jr. He is the chair of the Communications Technology Innovation Committee. He has been a member of the Virginia House of Delegates since 2016. He represents the 77th District, parts of City of Chesapeake and Virginia Beach, Virginia. All right, we'll start our questions and I will try to get to the issue at hand. So my first question to you all is, as a result of the George Floyd killing by the police, the Black Lives Matter movement has been re-engaged not only in the United States, but around the world. How do you see this being used to move meaningful legislation forward? I would start with Delegate Hayes.
Thank you, Brother Fairchild. And certainly we consider this whole situation unfolding after the killing of Brother George Floyd exemplifies the need for the change in the systemic nature, psyche, and paradigm when it comes to keeping our communities safe and the role that police should have in that role. I think that while the focus is on this situation after 400 years pretty much of us being in this country, going through the things that we have been going through, this captured via video recording of a 14-year-old citizen. Thank God she was recording and shared it with the world. So no longer are those instances able to be written and signed off as another person with asphyxia, anxiety from being arrested, and because of hypertension, all of those combined contributed to the death of the individual. That is the story, and that's the plot of so many of these deaths of Black and brown individuals in this country that have been killed at the hands of police. And so now, with that video, as my football coach used to say, video and films do not lie. And so what we saw there is exactly what happened to Brother Floyd. It was an outrage, and it has awakened the nation when it comes to policing. And so in the way of legislation, the state, federal level, some of the things that we're doing to address those situations, and I won't touch on them all, I want to leave some for Delegate Torian as well as Delegate Charles, or we need to deal with this issue of not only the police officer, the bad actor, but we want to make it a crime for those other officers standing around watching these egregious situations and they do nothing about it. We want to make sure that in officer shootings in police departments, that they're not investigated on the local level by the police department or those Commonwealth's attorney's offices. We want to make sure that in the case of no-knock warrants, that we simply ban those situations, because we know what Sister Breonna Taylor and her family has dealt with as we continue to seek justice. And of course, the demilitarization of our police departments around the country is something that we definitely need in place. These are not military organizations. They should not be conducting themselves as such. And so we need to make sure that we have policies and laws in place to demilitarize our police departments. Right now, I have a cousin that was shot in the head with one of these beanbag rounds, and he was simply peacefully standing and observing, wasn't engaged at all in what was going on in a march in Texas. He's a quiet, inquisitive type of guy, well on his way to get his degree, but now all of that's been derailed because he was shot in the head by an officer who decided that he would just fire into a crowd indiscriminately. And so these are just some of the ways that we can start to deal with the issue. And again, I just want to make sure I leave some of those items out on the list for Brother Torian and Brother Charles to deal with and show and exemplify through policies and laws how we can deal with those situations as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Delegate Delegate Charles, can you give us a thought?
Thank you, Brother Fairchild. And thank you too, Brother Hayes. You mentioned it, and you know, the no-knock warrants, all of the issues that have been facing our communities throughout the country. And at this point, you know, especially I had the opportunity to see that you all are in a special session in Virginia. And I was so proud to see one of the testimonies that came in from one of your own delegates, Delegate Aird, in regards to the no-knock warrants. And I think this is something that truly needs to be addressed. There's so many pieces of legislation as far as, like you said, making sure we criminalize those police officers who sit by idly and do nothing while someone is being attacked by an officer. Brother Fairchild, Brother Hayes touched on a lot of topics, a lot of things that we need to address. And I'm 100% with them. I think those same things need to apply right here in the state of Maryland. And I can't wait for us to get into session so we can also put a lot of these pieces of legislation in place.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Brother TORIAN?
Thank you, Brother Fairchild, for the opportunity to join this panel. I think Delegate Charles and Delegate Hayes have hit on some very important points. Also, I really do want to commend the Virginia House of Delegates for the work that we're doing in regards to being proactive and putting forth legislation that is going to help to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. Another bill that we have recently passed is the prohibition on neck restraints as well. And we've also passed legislation in the General Assembly where we are enhancing training for our law enforcement officers and really helping them to understand what community policing is all about and the fact that they're there to protect and to serve our community, and developing healthy relationships within our law enforcement agencies is going to help the Commonwealth tremendously. So the proactive approach that we've taken here in the Commonwealth will help us to prevent some of these incidents that are occurring throughout the nation, and very pleased with the work that we're doing in the Virginia General Assembly. And also having community involvement means a great deal to us as well. And it allows us to peacefully protest, allow our positions to be heard, and also protect citizens as they exercise their freedom and their right to protest.
Good, thank you very much for all of you, what you said. The term qualified immunity has been floated out here as an issue. How are you all dealing with that? What kind of thought process are you have in reference to qualified immunity? And even in some cases, if you can begin off by just explaining what it is, but what it really does to cause this little problem to almost exist. I'll start with you, Delegate Charles.
So the definition of qualified immunity is a legal principle that grants government officials performing discretionary functions immunity from civil suits unless the plaintiff shows that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights. Now, when you look at qualified immunity and how it's been utilized by police departments across the country, if we did not have cameras to show what took place with Brother George Floyd, what would probably have taken place is that officer probably would have used qualified immunity to say that he needed to restrain him in order to make sure that the situation was under control before they can fully arrest him. When we look at qualified immunity, you know, it beats up on me. And it's something that I think that we all need to change across the country, because at this point in time, even before, you know, from the past and now into the present and to the future, folks utilizing qualified immunity to get away with murder, get away with abuse, get away with harming our communities for so long. I'm just happy that we got folks like Brother TORIAN and Hayes in Virginia, folks like myself and my colleagues in the House in Maryland, that see that it's time for a change. Putting harm to people under police custody, this should not allow you to have qualified immunity. It definitely should not allow, that should not be allowed. It's a touchy subject for me because it needs to change immediately. It needs to change immediately, Brother Fairchild and Brother Marion. Yes, I'm
sorry, go down. You finished?
No, it's just, it's such a sad subject. It's a sad, touchy, you know, we're talking about people's lives that are at risk at this point. You know, so many people have died at the hands of law enforcement officers across the country. And it's time for us to make a change and get rid of qualified immunity. It's simple, in my opinion. We need to get rid of it at this point.
Okay, Delegate TORIAN, your response to that?
I am in agree with my colleague from Maryland that qualified immunity needs to be done away with. Listen, when you have a police officer who is doing his or her job, not breaking the law, doing what they're supposed to do under the law, they have nothing to fear, nothing to be afraid of. But if you're seeking to cover something up, if you're seeking to cover up a crime or inappropriate behavior, one should not have the protectionism from qualified immunity to keep them from being fairly adjudicated. And so we are very proud in the Virginia General Assembly that we have a bill by Delegate Jeff Board that is going through the legislative process now, which should be on third read this week. And we hope to pass that piece of legislation very soon to rid qualified immunity.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm going to ask another question that seems to be misnamed the way it comes out, and that has this thought process about defunding the police. I think people have been a little confused. When you hear it, it sounds like eliminate the police, but that's not exactly what it is. Delegate Hayes, can you talk about that a little bit and help everyone understand what it really means and how it can help to address the situation that people have concerns about?
Certainly, Brother Fairchild, words matter, terms matter, and we have to stay focused and make sure that we solve problems, right? And not be distracted and taken off message, taken off of the focus of solving the issue that is at hand. We all want safe communities, and we can't fall into a situation where it makes us look as though we don't want safe communities as well, because we all want safe communities. And so what we're interested in is not doing away with the police per se. We're more interested in the restructuring, right, of police departments on the local level in our communities. In other words, in the case of individuals having mental health crisis, there needs to be funding in place so that the appropriate people can be on the scene to help de-escalate those situations. Right now, before us in the House in Virginia, we have a bill, hopefully that will pass today actually, that will say that we will be able to have those people who are professionally trained when it comes to mental health and dealing with mental health crises to respond to a situation on the scene with the police, and they can help in that regard de-escalate a situation, rather than to have someone who spent, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, you know, reading a video or a book with just 3 hours, and then off they go on the scene. So, we want to deal with things in a different way so that the police department's funding is not unlimited, and yet we are able to use many of those resources that traditionally have been thrown that way unanswered, to be more structured in a way that we can deal with the problems of society.
All right. Thank you much. Thank you. Question in reference to the misconduct registry. I mean, a lot of times the question has been asked, well, if a guy does something, a policeman does something bad in this area, and he works in this particular state, and he can not say he's working in Virginia, and that misconduct registry should be able to follow him wherever he goes. But is that something that you guys are looking at or considered, so that the person don't go from one place to another place and go to work and is a bad actor in one place, it turns out to be a bad actor in another location? Delegate Charles?
Thanks, Brother Fairchild. You know, when that's more of a federal issue. You know, when we look at a lot of police officers coming across state lines into other jurisdictions, you can do background checks, right? You do background checks to find out, you know, where this person has worked, were they a police officer before? And then once you can find that information out, you can reach out to the department. But I truly believe we need to have a federal registry when we need to work with our congressional counterparts, because this right now, with the state of Maryland and Virginia being so close to each other, the state of Maryland being so close to Delaware, there's still issues where you may not be able to truly get all of the full details because that data is not readily available. We had a situation in the state of Maryland where we end up losing a young brother by the name of Anton. There's a bill in the state of Maryland right now to address these issues, to make sure these issues like this don't happen again. But there was a police officer who was fired in the state of Delaware for excessive force and kicking an individual in the face while he was already on the ground. And that same police officer, after that video went viral, he was let go from that police department and then came into the state of Maryland on the Eastern Shore and ran into this young brother by the name of Anton and tased him to death. This is an individual who showed no remorse for how he felt about human life at all. And the fact that he was able to come across state lines from Delaware into Maryland, you know, that truly shows why we need this federal database in place. Because right now, just the way to communicate from police department to police department, if there's nothing to flag an individual, I think that puts us all in harm's way. I know if there was a doctor that something happened to in another state and he lost his accreditation, I wouldn't want him to come into the state of Maryland to operate on me. So why would we want a police officer who's been abusive and has actually shown that he has no regard to human life come across state lines and to work in our states? So it's definitely important that we work directly with our federal counterparts. And I hope that's something that's on the table right now, to have a federal registry to make sure that we can protect ourselves at the state levels.
Thank you. Delegate TORIAN, how do you see that?
I'm certainly in agreement with Delegate Charles that there should be such a national registry that would follow law enforcement officers who have demonstrated bad behavior in one jurisdiction and they are seeking employment in another jurisdiction. Their records really should follow them, and there should be a national registry that has recorded this kind of behavior so that bad cops don't leave one jurisdiction and then they're employed by another jurisdiction. That is something that is very much needed, and I support it.
Okay. I'm gonna ask this question, and this is kind of an interesting thought process here. So listen carefully to it and think about it before you answer the question. The role of the police, do you think they are designed to protect us, or do they see Black people as in a different light? Delegate Hayes.
Thank you, Brother Fairchild. I think it kind of stems back to something that I know time and time again. I've heard folks like Congressman CLYBURN and Johnson, as well as where we are in the 3rd Congressional District of Virginia, Congressman Bobby Scott. They all continue to emphasize the importance of having law enforcement be somehow intricately connected to the communities in which they're serving. The numbers are astronomical when it comes to the number of officers that are not living in the area in which they're policing. We think it makes it pretty difficult to humanize a situation when you can just ride from outside of the area, come in on a shift, wreak havoc, hop in the car and ride back home. And so I know growing up where I did in South Norfolk, the community during the years of playing in the athletic leagues, etc., the police officers, the deputies, the firefighters, etc., public safety, lived in the community. They were the coaches in the leagues, etc. And so there was a personal interest that they had in the community. And so I couldn't imagine that officer that had his knee on George Floyd's neck being intricately involved in the community, living in that community, and trying to pull some mess like that. If he was involved in that community, knew that community, there ought to have been something that would kick in to make him see and connect himself with the members of that community in a different way. And so I think that has a large part of what can actually change that paradigm when it comes to the community.
Okay, Delegate Torian, how do you see that?
I think that law enforcement plays a very important role in our community. And I think that with all the things that have occurred over the last several months, training is equally as important, and having the right appropriate training and helping people understand their role and responsibility. Do I think that law enforcement has an aversion to African Americans? That question can be debated by a lot of folks. And I think that within our society, we have more good law enforcement personnel than bad. If you look at the percentage of them, and it's that small percentage that has this tendency to disrupt our society. And listen, let me share this with you. We need law enforcement in our communities. We need them for protection. They're there to protect and to serve. And it's how they go about doing their job. They have to be trained to understand that when you walk into the midst of a situation, your job is not to escalate the situation, but to de-escalate it. And sometimes it's simply saying to a young man who's in his 20s, listen, get in your car and go home, or we'll get in your car and we will follow you till you get home. De-escalate the situation opposed to bring attention to it, and then the criminality piece comes into play. And then all of our communities are left with the impression that we don't need law enforcement. We do need law enforcement. We need smart law enforcement in relationships with the people that they're called to serve.
Okay, good. Delegate Charles, in light of what Brother Torian just said, you see the reaction. We asked the question, it seems like black men are targets. And that question kind of, the original question kind of leads in that direction to say, so do you see us different? Is that why you decide that you need to attack a black man versus not doing it with another race? So can you react to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can, Brother Fairchild. You know, when we look at police officers coming into our community, you may hear some of them say they want to do real policing. They want to do real policing. They'll come from West Virginia into a majority black community and want to do real policing. And I find that as a problem when I hear that statement a lot of times when folks state that real policing concept. Because what does that mean? Is that not real policing in a small majority white town? Is that not real policing when you are protecting and serving? Is it only real policing when you come into a community where folks don't look like you, and you are going into where there may be a quote unquote high crime population? Is that real policing? You know, I think we have to look at folks that utilize that type of language and that terminology and question what their intent is in our community. You know, because like you said, that can actually start to sound like targeting, wanting to come in and target people within our communities. So we have to be very, very careful. I think when we talk about the totality of policing, we always got to go back to the very beginning of how you become a police officer. And looking at those individuals who want to come into our communities, making sure we do the proper background checks, not only finding out, making sure if they coming from a different police department, if they were a person who actually had a disregard for human life, but making sure that that same police officer doesn't have any mental health issues, making sure that particular police officer coming into our community doesn't have a implicit bias, and they feel like they cannot actually police a majority black community. So you have to ask all of those right questions before we send people out into our communities to protect us. And that's not saying that just because somebody's white, they can't police a black community. I don't think anybody is saying that, but for far too long, what we have seen historically, time and time again, is that it always seems to be a racial disparity between folks coming into our black communities and policing, and the type of abuse that comes from that policing in our communities. So I think we have to really have a decent conversation. We really have to always go back to the very beginning and make sure that we're bringing the right type of people into our communities, and we ask the right type of questions, and we put the right type of hurdles for folks to come on in. I know for me to go into the military, I had to go over some hurdles. You know, you can't just go into the military. They ask you a bunch of questions before you come to the military. You have to go through rigorous exams before you can get in, PT tests and your basic training, and that lasts longer than a lot of the boot camps to become a police officer. So we have to look at the total understanding of what it takes to become an officer and what questions we're asking folks before they actually come onto our departments in our community.
Okay, thank you all very much unfortunately, we have to bring this conversation to an end. We have a short period of time, so I wanted to thank you for the information you shared. I hope we'll have an opportunity sometime in the future to expand on this a little bit more, because I think it's worthy of discussion, the issues and concerns that people have. And the question is that, especially when it comes to seem to fall into a racial thought process, it really requires some serious discussion. And sometimes I think the communities around us have a tendency to fear having that conversation, but it's a conversation we need to have. So thank you all very much. I want to go now and introduce our individuals that are going to give us remarks. We will have Congressman Hank Johnson. He is right now working as a co-sponsor for the George Floyd Policing Act bill. In fact, he was going to be in this session, but he is in the process of working on marking up some of the bills now. So we will, but he will be our next person giving a remarks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia's 4th Congressional District, and I want to thank the men of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated for hosting this event during this year's Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference. Each year at the ALC, I look forward to participating in our fraternity's workshop on uplifting black men and boys, and the horrific killing of George Floyd was a shocking example of why our past attention and our ongoing attention to the condition of black males in America is so important. I also have to give a big shout out to our dear brother, Jim CLYBURN, for standing strong in the House of Representatives as the Democratic whip. His job was to make sure that we had the votes to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Brother CLYBURN deserves a hand for getting it done, and I would be remiss if I were to fail to recognize the fact that Brother CLYBURN has done for the nation something that only he could do. He single-handedly and with restrained passion, great sincerity, and wise efficiency put Joe Biden into position to be our next president. Brothers, Jim CLYBURN showed the world what the word uplift is all about. I also want to recognize and thank the brothers participating on this amazing panel, Fatherhood, Black Men and Boys, Police Brutality, the Killing of Our People Must Stop, for the contribution that you're making to this very important topic. This panel gets at the core of what is going on in just about everybody's mind who's been paying attention, and that is the reckless and wanton killing of unarmed black people in America by out-of-control law enforcement must end. As a member of Omega Psi Phi and as a former criminal defense attorney and judge, and quite frankly as a human being first and as a father, these extrajudicial killings of black men and women in America has become too much to bear. In 2015, in the aftermath of the shooting of Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina, which is either in or close to Brother CLYBURN's district, I went to the House floor and declared that it felt like it was open season on black men in America. I got pushback for that observation, and many white people and members of the media didn't understand what I was saying. They didn't understand the pain, the anguish, the anger, and the frustration we feel when we have to watch yet another video of an unarmed black man being shot multiple times in the back and killed by police officers or vigilantes. But this year, in the aftermath of the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and Trayford Pellerin, and with the recent attempt to kill Jacob Blake by shooting him in the back 7 times in front of his 3 sons, it feels like most of America is waking up to the harsh reality that black folks have lived for our entire lives, and that is that black lives have not mattered in America. But now, people young and old, black people, white people, Latino, Asian, and Native American people have stood up, marched in unity in the streets, and proclaimed in loud voices that black lives matter. America has turned a corner, and I'm here to tell you, my brothers and sisters, that we're not going back. That's why I was proud to join Brother CLYBURN and our Congressional Black Caucus Chair, Karen Bass, and so many other great servant leaders to put forward the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to change the culture of policing black people in America, to hold police officers accountable, and to restore trust in law enforcement by increasing transparency and accountability, to change the culture of policing from the RoboCop warrior style to the protect and serve guardian model in our communities, starts with my legislation that demilitarizes our police departments by closing down the pipeline of weapons from foreign battlefields straight to the streets of our communities. And I'm proud that the Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act was included as a section of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And when enacted into law, it will go a long way towards ending the practice of police officers treating the citizens they serve as enemy combatants. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act bans racial profiling, incentivizes nationwide standards of conduct through the national accreditation process, and ends qualified immunity for police officers, which will make it possible to successfully sue officers and agencies for civil rights violations. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act also makes it easier to bring federal criminal charges against officers who deprive individuals of their constitutional rights. It bans the use of chokeholds. It establishes a national database of bad cops. It strengthens reporting requirements for incidents involving use of force, and it increases the use of body and dashboard cameras. It's only through fundamental change and reform like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that we as a community and as a nation can begin to address the problems of systemic racism, white supremacy, and police violence. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act represents transformational change that serves as a paradigm shift in the way law enforcement relates to black and brown people in America. Thank you for having me here today. Together we can make change a reality through forums and dialogue like this, and we can bring awareness and understanding. So I appreciate it, and y'all have a great day.
Okay, the next person that will give remarks will be Majority Whip Congressman James CLYBURN. Congressman CLYBURN has been a member of the House of Representatives, and he serves as a Majority Whip. He served since 2019. He is a two-time Majority Whip, having previously served in the post from 2007 to 2011, and serves in the House Assistant Minority Leader for 2011 to 2019. He represents the South Carolina 6th Congressional District. Congressman CLYBURN has always been helpful in allowing us to work and provide information in reference to a lot of subjects that we want to discuss with concern in the community. So we thank Congressman CLYBURN, and now Congressman CLYBURN, it's your stage.
My brothers, it is with pleasure that I once again welcome you to the Congressional Black Caucus's annual legislative conference. We have been doing this for several years, and each year you have selected a theme, none more appropriate than the one you have selected for this year. Now I know that we have been watching films, reading reports, and otherwise keeping up with what's been going on in our law enforcement community. But I believe that paying attention to this, not just because of what is occurring, but because of the tacit support that seems to be coming from the highest office in the land. I never thought, and I know none of you ever thought, you would live to see the day and the President of the United States will seem to give aid and comfort to people who are not only just breaking the law, but people who are engaging in vigilante activities and doing so with impunity. So I'm hopeful that as you have your discussions this year, that you will remember that it's also important that we act this year. We have, in less than 2 months, an opportunity to do something about changing the course of actions in this great country. And it is a great country. I've said time and time again that we don't have to make this country great again. It is already great. Our challenge is to make this country's greatness accessible and affordable for all of its citizens. And that includes law enforcement, education, healthcare, housing, you name it. Our country has an abundance of all of it. The question is, can we make it available to everybody and affordable for those who need? So as you have your discussions, I'm hopeful that we will conclude the year celebrating what we were able to do, not just in September, but in November as well. Thank you.
Next, we have our grand bosses, Dr. David MARION. He is the grand boss for the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, which consists of 750 plus chapters in the United States and around the world. He is a leader. He's also a mental health person. And I'm sure as he rose up his remarks, he'll kind of address that, because that was one of the concerns that came out of the conversation about how police go after people with mental issues. So, Brother Grand, Dr. David MARION.
Well, I certainly heard some of the comments about having police officers, law enforcement trained in mental health awareness, being able to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental illness, knowing where folks can get resources. So I think all of that's important when people answer calls with those that have mental disorders. I also think the people that you've had on this call are champions in the Virginia and Maryland state houses, and they certainly represent their states well, and they certainly represent the Omega Psi Phi fraternity incorporated well, and we appreciate them. I think anytime you have a discussion about structural systemic racism, it's always going to be unnerving. But that's what it needs to be if you're going to get to a place where everyone can coexist in equal ways. And so I think these kinds of discussions are necessary. I love the remark by Will Smith, who said racism has not gotten worse, it's just getting filmed. And I just think that's so important in this day and time that we appreciate that. As we talked about, I live here in Mississippi. And of course, anytime you talk about racism and the killing of young men, my mind goes back to all of the thousands of men, Black men that have been lynched and killed in my state, but particularly 1955 with Emmett Till. Imagine someone accusing you of flirting with a white woman, and then decades later she recants, but her husband and brother go and snatch this 14-year-old boy from his uncle's house, have him carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan all the way to the banks of the Tallahatchie River, have him strip down, take all of his clothes off and beat him practically to death. After doing that, they gouge his eye out, shoot him in the head, tie him to that 75-pound cotton gin fan with barbed wire, and kick him over into the Tallahatchie River. That is the kind of violence that Black men have seen in this country for 400 years. And so any discussion like this, as we approach an election, is very important. We're currently working on an initiative to get 1 million more Black men out to vote on November 3rd. And so we certainly in Omega support all of the protests that have occurred with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Jacob Blake and all of our loved ones who have died unjustly at the hands of law enforcement. But the most important march we can make is the march to the polls on November 3rd. And so in our fraternity, we're encouraging everyone to get out and vote, to mobilize, to educate people on the down ballot candidates, and to vote their hearts. And that's what we ask everyone listening to this, to make certain they show up and show out on November 3rd. Thanks.
Thank you, Brother Grant. Okay, in conclusion, knowing that it takes time for legislation to go into effect, we have to take action in the meantime and be more aggressive in our efforts in working with fathers, young men, and boys. We must make a strong and continued effort to teach them how to handle themselves in the presence of police. Here's something to consider. Two elements that make up a formula for disaster when they come together in our communities. Number one, members in the community being afraid of the police and not knowing their rights and the laws. Number two, the police operating in a community of individuals that they don't know, causing them to have a heightened sense of fear. Both of these situations have to be addressed to break this setting for a potential conflict. We can work in our communities to bring together members of the community and the police department with a focus toward raising awareness, improving relationship, and reducing the potential for disaster results. We need to work and consider every possible solution to bring these senseless acts to an end. I would like to thank you all for your participation, and certainly, this, like I said, it requires further discussion amongst everyone. Communication is very important, and we're going to bring this thing to an end amongst all races to come together and talk about this and bring it to an end, because it's inhumane, and to have a particular group of people targeted singly in all cases is definitely not right and must be brought to an end. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.